Good afternoon, Abbotsford residents. I'm here at the Matsqui City Auditorium. I'm here because of the night of the mayor debate, when I ran my mayor campaign with one of the best premiers that was ever in British Columbia to help me with his MLAs. I was not allowed to debate, and that was due to Greg Toes, the Chamber of Commerce. Greg Toes, who's the Chamber of Commerce, who hosts these debates to rig the election, put Ross Siemens 3 months in advance over the other mayors. Greg Toes wouldn't let me debate if I mentioned Henry's hit and run. I mentioned Henry had Keelan Olenoff threaten to drop a lawsuit and videos. I mentioned Henry's ties, that he had city councils, your city councils that are supposed to be working for you, in his house to help Henry get his jobs through and what Henry was owning. Also, Ross Siemens, who took over from Henry Braun when he was in conflict of interest owning land to a job site, Ross allowed Henry's son to carry on and run the meetings and the jobs through. Ross Siemens knowingly and willingly committed election fraud to get that city chairs. He knew Greg Toes had no business blocking or censoring anybody. It's our democratic right to run in the election. It's also a democracy here in Canada that everybody is allowed to be in the election. Nobody should be censored and blocked. Not only that, Ross Siemens' best friend, Dave Sidhu, who runs the Capriccio newspaper with his dad, Andy Sidhu, his dad's the chancellor of UFV. He went and asked his dad to pull me out so it would win Ross the mayorship. That's Dave Sidhu, the city councillor here. But blocking and censoring somebody so you can rig election for a paycheck and commit fraud, not to govern Abbotsford, but to commit fraud in Abbotsford. This is what Ross did. Now BC elections and the Attorney General will be faced with to dissolve the election. It has to be dissolved. Nobody should be threatened or blocked so some greedy little bugger like Ross Siemens can get the chair. Ross Siemens in his next term will go around probably paying people off or go around having their families threatened so he could win. UFV directly threat was to remove me so I couldn't debate Ross Siemens. What they were doing is, Manji Sohi was running for mayor, so they were taking extra precaution here in Abbotsford to make sure Manji Sohi would win and lose the mayorship. If I debated Ross, Sohi would be the mayor because Ross would be in a scandal. Ross would be in a scandal for taking his gas station and remodeling it and dumping it in Mission, the next municipality. Ross would be in a scandal for knowing he committed fraud with city councils in Henry's house and job sites. Ross would be in a scandal knowing Henry's son was in front of him. So Ross Siemens, with Mike de Jong, who's our BC sitting MLA, was running Dave Sidhu, and they're all friends. Marcus Dalvis is on his CPA, is on his riding association for Mike de Jong. But the problem is this: loudmouth Ed Fast is trying to call Trudeau down and tell Trudeau about elections and what took place. But Ed Fast was aware of Henry Braun, his best friend, doing this and blocking the election. So there was only 3 mayors allowed to run, and I was halted from the mayorship. When I learnt this from Darren Braun, which is Henry's own son, the former mayor, that he did this to the last past people that were running. He had electoral officers going around picking Eric Nivel's signs up, Bruce Bamman's signs, and Councillor Mogill, who ran against Henry because of the corruption laying in the city. So Henry Braun basically is the engine behind this all. But for Ed Fast to stand and allow this to happen on Canadians and the democracy that we live in. So some greedy little bugger like Ross, not to govern Abbotsford, but to get a good paycheck and rip Abbotsford off. Right now, Ross Siemens is committing fraud because he's not the elective mayor. He did not allow Abbotsford residents to see what the other mayors opportunity of what they could do for Abbotsford, such as lower taxes, no tax increase next year, forensic audit of everything Henry was doing. Why the heck we're paying $71 million for a losing police station that was rammed through when the police wouldn't even come down here and do a police safety meeting when Brass Viss held it. Nobody should be threatened through the election so a cheater could win. Ross Siemens did that. Now it's faced with BC elections and the Attorney General now, not only to dissolve the election, but to bring charges against Ross and put him financially on the hook of everything he did for what he did in this election. To take his gas station and every asset he owns, he knowingly, willingly, openly committed fraud. Not only did he commit fraud to get the election, he knew and was aware of what Greg Toes was doing for him through the Chamber of Commerce. He knew this. So Ross Siemens, the night when he cheated and won, he said to the newspaper reporter, outsiders shouldn't run. And that is statement, I take that like this. Outsiders who are Abbotsford residents that want to stand up and do right will risk wrecking Ross's scam and Ross's job. So right now, Ross is signing signatures on everything here in the city, which is illegal. He's running these jobs through, which is illegal, because he is not the governing mayor. By censoring and blocking, and they directly blocked, so Ross could win. Abbotsford residents did not get to see this. Abbotsford newspaper would not let me run an ad. And then Ross's best friend, Dave Sidhu, who owns the Capriccio newspaper with his dad, wouldn't run it either. Andy Sidhu said, quote, Dave's own dad, I never did that at a UFV. My son did that for Ross Siemens to win the mayor seat. My son did them illegal things. My son did that all. He did it for his friend, Ross Siemens. He got you blocked and kicked out of UFV so Ross could win. So this is what they were doing. Unless you are a politician, unless you come in here with a lawyer and a uniform on, or a dignitary, you can't run in Abbotsford. When I learned that from Darren Brown, that the pro-editors of Abbotsford News, along with Tyler Olson, were in Henry's house and they were covering stories, I put my name forward, knowing everything from Henry's son of what they were going to do. I put my name forward so a man like Ross Siemens could be flashed around the world for what he did. The man cheated, he manipulated, he committed fraud, and now he committed fraud to get on the mayor's seat. That I can stand right here and openly tell you that. So Elections BC this week will be faced with major, major letters that were signed and witnessed through the whole election, because I knew it was coming, on Ross Siemens. I just don't want Ross Siemens kicked out as a mayor. I want him prosecuted under the law with Abbotsford residents so it never happens again. Ross knowingly and willingly committed these frauds. Ross stood to gain by this paycheck. Only Ross stood to gain. Ross could care less about anybody or anything or our democracy. Ross doesn't care who he walks on to get what he wants. And Ross did that night of this debate. Ross also did that at UFV with Dave Sidhu. Ross was aware of everything that took place. So this pity that we feel sorry for Ross, no. Ross knew what he was doing to run these job sites through. So Ross Siemens will be faced with BC elections and Attorney General. It's a sad thing in Canada when we have to go for our elections now and challenge them with lawyers and through the Supreme Court because of cheaters and liars and scams like Ross Siemens don't want to do what's right for Abbotsford residents. Ross Siemens could care less about Abbotsford residents. That we saw when houses knocked off the mountain. That we saw when Henry Brown used an Abbotsford police officer. That we saw when Henry Brown took city people from the community upstairs to censor meetings so they didn't get in front of the auditorium so it didn't affect Henry Brown. But the culprit behind this all is our MP, Ed Fast. Ed Fast is running his mouth off about Trudeau and what Trudeau's doing about our elections and what Trudeau's doing in Canada. And yet, Ed Fast stood here and allowed this to happen. And yet allowed this for us because I wasn't in Ed Fast's group. Like Ross Siemens said, I couldn't put it a better way. Outsiders shouldn't run. That means you should go join their little clique, and then that way, when you join their little clique and you're with them for a few years, maybe you get a run. This is Canada, Ross. This is Canada. This is why I want to stand here, because Abbotsford residents want the whole world to see this cheater and this loser that manipulated the elections to get in, blocked. You're not allowed to block nobody. And that shouldn't have been done by Greg Toes. Even RBC Bank said in their statement to me, RBC Bank said it's a democracy we live in. Greg Toes had no business doing this. Greg Toes did this because Greg Toes received some rewards, because Greg Toes knew better than to do this. I'm live here at the Abbotsford City Auditorium. And to Ross Siemens' wife, your husband shamed you, he shamed his family, he shamed his mom and his dad, and not only that, he cheated and lied and manipulated our city office, and Ross will stop at nothing. That's why half these meetings he's doing in behind the thing are probably committing fraud too. I knowingly, willingly did that to get that city office. He knew what he was doing. There was no excuse for him to do it, and he was not a man to stand up and say, I have no part of this. He knew his old team, Abbotsford First, that's their sports center, made sexual comments against me, trying to get me kicked out. They did everything they could. It wasn't successful enough to Ross Siemens, because I want to state this. The best people in the world here in Canada are the RCMP. Without their help, I couldn't stand here and tell you what could happen to this election. I couldn't stand here and tell you that Ross Siemens is a cheater, a liar, a manipulator, and committed fraud to get that office. Now it's up to BC Elections and Attorney General, as I push forward with Abbotsford residents, having enough, thanks to the RCMP, to bring him in and face charges. I don't think he should just be kicked off as mayor. He should face the consequences for anybody tampering with our democracy. And now Ed Fast will have to go and beg everybody to cover it up, because Ed Fast's hands are directly tied in this. I'm live, Bruce Bamman, here at the City Auditorium, where you should have stood up and told Ross Siemens, this is illegal, you little cheater. This is wrong, you little cheater. You should not be doing this. This is what Ross Siemens did. This is why Ross Siemens needed to do this. He also took his dirt out of his gas station when it was contaminated to Mission, because Ross doesn't care about people. Ross only cares about himself, and that there is what we saw here in Abbotsford, live at the City Auditorium, Bruce Bamman.